sta andando? Là. Ok. Benvenuti, welcome, bienvenido, willkommen, bienvenue a tutti. I must take a couple of minutes for your time because I have to express my really non-formal thanks to those who have worked on this crazy undertaking. I will use both English and Italian, and in English, so that is clear to everyone, I thank all of you who have decided to participate in this event, and I guess sometimes having to overcome a few difficulties for that no bad times. Ora parlerò in italiano per favorire il pubblico per favorire i nostri ospiti. Devo ringraziare chi ci è venuto a salutare, ringrazio l'avvocato Catizzone che era dato in arrivo, purtroppo credo che non ci sia riuscito ancora a raggiungere, spero che arrivi più tardi, quindi vi lasceremo comunque la parola. L'avvocato Catizzone proviene dal Ministero dell'Università e della Ricerca. Ringrazio l'avvocato Razza che finalmente ho avuto il piacere di conoscere, che è praticamente, lo sto dicendo a tutti perché la nostra stella è l'unico con cui riusciamo ad avere un contatto al Ministero e che ci facilita tanto il lavoro a noi come scuole di psicoterapia, lavoro non facile, vi posso assicurare, anche per gli aspetti di carattere burocratico. Io leggo perché sono tanti ringraziamenti, scusatemi. Ringrazio il Consiglio Nazionale dell'Ordine degli Psicologi che come vedete ci ha dato il patrocinio, che ci ha concesso il suo logo e quindi in qualche modo ci ha sottolineato il riconoscimento di questo importante evento, soprattutto perché è un evento che è contrassegnato dalla presenza di tutto il mondo e questo credo che sia una cosa veramente molto bella. Ringrazio l'amico dottore Zinno che per la sua vicinanza rappresenta la trade union con la medicina e poi sentiremo come lui intende questo tipo di contatto col nostro mondo. Devo ringraziare l'Infondo, scusate, io vi chiedo un piccolo applauso per lo Studio S, che veramente l'abbiamo... L'architetto Santoni, ma tutti quanti, Marilena, Elisabetta, cioè, penso che molti di voi hanno avuto contatti con loro e sanno quanto sia stato complicato. I would like to thank Gideon Menda and Nancy Hakim-Dowek. If I remember well, the title of the conference is Her Idea, or no, Gideon? Yes, okay. For all the support they have given us during this long year of preparation. Poi devo ringraziare, eccoli là, almeno come rappresentanza, qualcuno non c'è, dopo tirerò le orecchie, il comitato scientifico, i nostri allievi che ci hanno dato una grandissima mano, sono stati assolutamente un aiuto importante, il comitato del segretariato scientifico, ma prima ancora ovviamente per l'importanza, scusatemi ragazzi, dobbiamo ringraziare il comitato scientifico e quindi in primis Paola Pomponi che è stata, da dire il vero dovevo arrabbiarmi con lei perché è lei che ha fatto, ha dato la stura a quest'idea, a Kirk Schneider che è stato vicinissimo a noi, Michela Pucci, Jackie Martinez Robles e poi ovviamente il mio amico, formatore, maestro Ferdinando Brancaleone che poi è un po' diciamo, il nostro ispiratore nella scuola. Con loro ringrazio tutti i keynote speakers, siete tanti, troppi, non vi posso salutare tutti, e allora permettetemi di salutare simbolicamente, lo ripeto anche in inglese questo, Emmy Van Dorzen che ha avallato e sostenuto il progetto ed Ernesto Spinelli che ha avallato le mie scelte di metodo. Ma avete capito? Non c'è bisogno del mio bad English, ok? E ovviamente a questo punto arriviamo al comitato, al segretariato scientifico dei nostri allievi, e li nomino perché sono stati tutti molto attenti, molto validi: Rosalba Davino, Gabriella Restifo, Silvana Figlioli, Federica Grilanda, Carmine Verino, ma soprattutto chi ha coordinato tutti loro, Rita Desiderio, a cui veramente ci vuole un applauso enorme perché è stata bravissima. Alla fine, perché insomma ho dimenticato sicuramente qualcuno, e scusatemi, apologize for my bad memory, ma alla fine, come ultimo ringraziamento, perché è sempre così, ci siamo sempre messi alla fine, ci siamo sempre trattati anche male quando abbiamo parlato dal pulpito, devo ringraziare il mio amico fraterno Fernando Boscaino, che molti di voi con cui hanno concordato, contattato, e sapete perfettamente che ha interloquito più volte lui e non io, è stato lui forse più diretto di questo. E a questo punto lascio proprio a Ferdinando Brancaleone e a Fernando Boscaino la parola per presentare appunto i nostri due ospiti per il saluto, e poi ci risentiamo per l'introduzione. Grazie.
Buonasera a tutti e benvenuti. Allora, il professore Buffardi ci investe sempre di ruoli, di compiti, eccetera. Avrei dovuto presentare i nostri ospiti. Di fatto l'ha fatto lui, per cui io non so più cosa raccontare dell'avvocato Razza e del professore Zino. Voglio invece ribadire il concetto, l'avvocato Razza davvero è il nostro interlocutore istituzionale, ma più che questo ci fa da consulente per orientarci negli aspetti burocratici del Ministero. Peraltro, in quanto coordinatore dell'ufficio quinto del Ministero dell'Università e della Ricerca, è veramente una fonte preziosa di informazioni. Il professore Zinno, presidente di un'associazione che si chiama Professioni Sanitarie, Assicurative e Forensi. Questi ultimi, l'aspetto assicurativo e forense legale assume da credo almeno un ventennio a questa parte un'importanza molto marcata dall'avvento, cioè, della cosiddetta medicina difensiva e, per estensione, potremmo dire che anche le professioni sanitarie non mediche, psicologi e psicoterapeuti, debbano e possano essere interessati al concetto di medicina difensiva, nel senso che sempre più spesso gli operatori della sanità, ripeto, siano essi medici, psicologi, psicoterapeuti, incorrono in azioni legali da parte dei pazienti per presunti, magari qualche volta anche reali, danni da negligenza professionale. Ecco, ma io credo che sia il professor Zinno che l'avvocato Razza, che voglio ringraziare ancora una volta, ci diranno qualcosa di maggior dettaglio e di maggior puntualità. Vi ringrazio e buon lavoro a tutti. Thank you.
Grazie a tutti per l'invito, in particolare grazie al professor Buffardi per l'organizzazione di questa fantastica e importante evento al quale ho il piacere di partecipare e di aprire i lavori. Come ha già detto il professor Boscaino, io mi interesso al Ministero dell'Università e Ricerca dell'abilitazione delle scuole di specializzazione in psicoterapia ormai da oltre 20 anni, quindi pur essendo un avvocato sono abituato a frequentare molto i psicoterapeuti, perché faccio parte della Commissione Tecnica Nazionale per la psicoterapia, quindi sono nel settore da tempo e quindi conosco abbastanza quelle che sono le problematiche del settore e soprattutto quello che conosco è la possibilità di sviluppo di questa professione dell'area sanitaria, perché stiamo parlando a pieno titolo ormai dalla legge Lorenzin di professione di area sanitaria, quindi è diventata una professione importante, perché dovete capire che tanti anni fa la psicologia, la psicoterapia non veniva inserita a pieno titolo nell'area sanitaria, invece abbiamo fatto una battaglia per far riconoscere l'importanza all'interno dell'area sanitaria ed oggi vediamo che ci sono degli sviluppi immensi per questa professione, perché sta prendendo sempre più piede come un aspetto di medicina preventiva, perché curare la mente significa un risparmio per la sanità pubblica, perché si evita la cronicizzazione di tante patologie che sono conseguenti a una mancata come dire, cura della mente. Ecco, questa è la cosa importante della psicoterapia. E quindi io oggi vedo che ci sono tanti giovani che si avvicinano a questa specializzazione e che avranno, a mio giudizio, un futuro in espansione, enorme espansione. Quindi quello che posso adesso qua delineare è uno scenario attuale ho preso un po' di appunti per leggervi quello che è lo scenario attuale della situazione in Italia. In Italia lo scenario della salute mentale negli ultimi anni è profondamente cambiato, così come sono profondamente cambiati i luoghi della vita sociale e relazionale e il loro impatto sulla salute mentale. Assistiamo all'emergere di nuove forme della sofferenza psichica, quali sono i disturbi del neurosviluppo, ad esempio l'autismo, il disturbo di attenzione, di iperattività, la comorbilità di sostanze stupefacenti, i disturbi psichiatrici che sono emersi in particolar modo durante la pandemia del Covid-19 e sono ad esempio la disregolazione emotivo-affettiva negli adolescenti, questo è molto importante, con atti di autolesionismo, anoressia, poliabuso di alcol e di sostanze psicotrope o stupefacenti, violenza digitale, depressione, ansia e ritiro sociale. Eppure poi c'è il long Covid, che è una forma di depressione, grave depressione, dell'umore ed espressione prevalentemente somatica, nonché poi ci sono le nuove forme di disagio sociale che sono legate ad esempio all'uso dei social network, al fenomeno delle migrazioni e quindi cresce parimenti la difficoltà del servizio pubblico, qui voglio venire al punto della professione, perché c'è necessità della professione? Perché la difficoltà dei servizi pubblici per la salute mentale di modificare la propria organizzazione, che è un'organizzazione antiquata, di acquisire nuove risorse per rispondere a questi nuovi bisogni e tutelare la sicurezza anche degli operatori sanitari, che noi quotidianamente vediamo che è messa a rischio anche in tutti i presidi, lo vediamo nelle cronache recenti. E a fronte di questo scenario in evoluzione, nonostante ormai sia riconosciuto dall'Organizzazione per la cooperazione e per lo sviluppo economico che gli investimenti in salute mentale conducano a un aumento del PIL nazionale, il finanziamento invece dei servizi per la salute mentale appare fortemente disomogeneo in tutte le regioni. La media italiana si colloca attorno al 3%. Questo si discosta con quanto stabilito nella conferenza dei presidenti delle regioni nel lontano 2001, che avevano stabilito di destinare almeno il 5% dei fondi sanitari regionali per le attività di promozione e di tutela della salute mentale. Quindi vediamo quanto siamo indietro. Per queste ragioni nel nostro Paese si registra da tempo una preoccupazione per lo stato dei servizi di salute mentale, che ad oggi appare frammentata e certamente non idonea a soddisfare i bisogni della popolazione. Questa inadeguatezza viene denunciata anche dalle famiglie, dalle persone che subiscono nelle loro famiglie un disturbo mentale e che spesso si trovano da sole ad affrontare il peso della gestione di queste problematiche. L'Organizzazione Mondiale della Sanità definisce la salute come uno stato di benessere fisico, mentale e sociale e non semplicemente di Ok. Sì. Sì. L'Organizzazione Mondiale della Sanità definisce la salute come uno stato di totale benessere fisico, mentale e sociale e non semplicemente assenza di malattie o infermità, allo scopo di promuovere un livello di benessere che consenta alla persona di realizzarsi in pienezza nella sua vita personale e di inserirsi in modo compiuto nella vita sociale. Pertanto è necessario che l'individuazione del disturbo mentale avvenga sin dalla preadolescenza e prima dell'età adulta, al fine di prevenirne e minimizzare le conseguenze, sia in termini di impatto sintomatologico e comportamentale prospettico, sia di conservazione della qualità della vita della persona, delle reti interpersonali e delle opportunità di sviluppo e di realizzazione individuali. Questi obiettivi devono essere perseguiti avviando dei percorsi individuali, familiari e sociali mediante il supporto educativo, psicosociale, psicoterapeutico e riabilitativo, che devono migliorare la prognosi e prevengano gli esiti in termini di cronicizzazione. Tutto questo è per dire che lo Stato purtroppo è indietro nella gestione di questa problematica. Per questo noi siamo convinti, siamo fautori della importanza della professione della psicoterapia nel futuro, perché la dobbiamo guardare come una prevenzione e addirittura un risparmio per la sanità pubblica, perché se si cura la mente si evitano tante malattie croniche che costituiscono un costo per la sanità pubblica e soprattutto c'è un benessere sociale assicurato. Quindi io sono convinto e spingo soprattutto per la qualità, perché come Ministero stiamo pensando addirittura con la Commissione di cercare di alzare il livello per fare una qualità migliore per le scuole di specializzazione, per evitare che siccome tante scuole sono state pure fatte nel passato e che avevano anche dei criteri diciamo un po' vecchiotti, invece le scuole moderne sono tutte quante autorizzate con criteri di qualità altissimi, come per esempio quella del professor Buffardi, che è stata una scuola abilitata negli ultimi anni con livelli di qualità eccellenti. E quindi noi cercheremo sempre di più di collaborare e di aiutare quelle che sono le eccellenze in questo settore, perché ci crediamo molto. Probabilmente ci sarà un aggiornamento anche normativo del regolamento 509, che ormai è datato del 98, del 1998, che inizia ad avere i suoi limiti proprio normativi, perché era stato pensato in un periodo in cui non esistevano le scuole di specializzazione e non erano entrate nell'area sanitaria. Quindi oggi bisogna riguardare proprio gli standard qualitativi, perché dobbiamo immettere sul mercato del personale qualificato, perché la chiave del successo è questa. Non basta frequentare una scuola per dire io sono psicoterapeuta, bisogna essere preparati ed essere formati adeguatamente. Detto questo, io sono molto contento, vi rinnovo l'augurio di buon lavoro per tutti i giorni del vostro incontro e lascio la parola al professor Zinno, che credo che mi segue nella cosa.
Buonasera a tutti. Innanzitutto un doveroso ringraziamento al professore Buffardi per avermi invitato, per avermi permesso di essere presente a un evento così importante. Porto il saluto mio personale e di tutto il direttivo di PSAF al professore Buffardi, ai relatori, alle autorità e a tutti gli uditori presenti, con l'augurio di un buon lavoro. Bene, il chairman parlava di medicina difensiva, allora volevo un attimo spiegare un po'. PSAF, che cos'è PSAF? PSAF è una società scientifica, professionisti sanitari, assicurativi e forensi, che nasce nel 2017 all'indomani del varo della cosiddetta legge Gelli Bianco. Chi vi parla era uno dei componenti della commissione interministeriale, la commissione Alpa, che fece quella legge. Che cosa dice fra le tante cose questa legge? Che c'è un esimente ai fini della valutazione della responsabilità penale o civile degli operatori sanitari se si seguono le linee guida o le buone pratiche, linee guida che vengono elaborate da società scientifiche riconosciute al Ministero della Salute. PSAF è una delle 3 società scientifiche riconosciute al Ministero per l'elaborazione delle linee guida. Parlava di responsabilità degli psicologi e dice bene, perché la 2417 non è la legge sulla responsabilità medica, ma testualmente il titolo è Disposizioni in materia di sicurezza delle cure e della persona assistita, nonché in materia di responsabilità professionale degli esercenti le professioni sanitarie, quindi tutte le professioni dell'area sanitaria. Ed è il motivo, io sono un medico legale con un excursus di carriera, ero ai vertici del sindacato dei medici legali, perché medico legale non ho chiamato società scientifica di medicina legale, ma di professionisti sanitari assicurativi forensi, proprio perché credo fermamente in quella che è la norma e che poi alla fine la prestazione sanitaria non è solo l'atto medico, ma è l'insieme di tutte quelle prestazioni che si sommano uno dietro l'altro fino a centrare il bersaglio comune, il benessere del paziente, l'uscita dalla malattia e quant'altro, come la vogliamo chiamare. Bene, detto questo breve excursus che non mi ero preparato, però ho sentito doveroso, così quindi su questo col professore Buffardi e con staff scientifico lavoreremo, eventualmente l'elaborazione di linee guida e quant'altro possa servire a tutelare la serenità di voi operatori psicologi, per mettervi al riparo, quantomeno il più possibile al riparo, da eventuali contenziosi o sequele giudiziarie che possano, credetemi, fanno perdere il soldo. Dire la verità, il professore Buffardi è già da parte team di ricerca di PSAF, con lui stiamo lavorando su una serie di progetti molto importanti. Uno dei nostri progetti è stato presentato l'altro ieri ad Abu Dhabi, sta avendo un grosso successo internazionale, una serie di problematiche sulle quali poi non mi rifondo a questo. Parlare in Italia di un rapporto fra medicina legale e psicologia esistenziale fa rimanere un po' basiti quasi tutti, mi riferisco all'Italia, perché il pensiero che corre è alla medicina clinica, alla psicologia clinica, oppure alla psicologia forense, dove così per sua natura sembrerebbe che non ci fossero o che non ci possano essere dei punti di contatto fra la medicina, fra la psicologia esistenziale e la medicina legale. Volento, insomma, potremmo dire che invece c'è il rapporto, è un rapporto complesso che può essere esplorato da varie angolazioni. Va sottolineato che la psicologia esistenziale non fornisce direttamente categorie diagnostiche come quelle psichiatriche, forse è questo che fa un pochino arricciare il naso. Offre invece una prospettiva sull'esperienza soggettiva del soggetto e quindi può offrire alla medicina legale una prospettiva filosofica e psicologica sull'esperienza umana che può arricchire la comprensione delle dinamiche emotive esistenziali e di significato che spesso sottintendono gli eventi o alcuni eventi di interesse forense. Quindi, contrariamente a quello che si pensa, potremmo avere degli strumenti più precisi per capire meglio alcune dinamiche. Mi riferisco, purtroppo la nostra cronaca da un po' di tempo sta diventando molto corposa e copiosa quando riguarda la violenza alle donne e il femminicidio. Vediamo se sta per riaprire il caso di Chiara Poggi, cioè si è riaperto il caso di Chiara Poggi e comincia a porre tutta una serie di domande e cose. Forse delle indagini fatte anche con la psicologia esistenziale, forse avremmo avuto qualche elemento in più per poter capire quali potevano essere alle basi. C'è di più. L'applicazione diretta dei principi della psicologia esistenziale nella pratica medico-legale è meno codificata e questo secondo me è un vantaggio rispetto alle altre branche della psicologia forense. Tuttavia, la sua cornice concettuale può fornire un background teorico prezioso per interpretare le reazioni umane di fronte a eventi significativi dal punto di vista giuridico. Non siamo pratici di esperti di medicina che si sovrappongono, di discipline che si sovrappongono, ma che invece sono complementari e possono dialogare per una comprensione più completa della complessità umana nei contesti legati. E questo è facilmente comprensibile se noi ci rifacciamo un pochino a qualche annetto fa. L'illuminismo, Kant, getta nella sua trilogia i principi fondamentali che poi sono stati ripresi e sono la base fondamentale degli stati di diritti moderni, degli stati di diritto moderni. E pur senza influenzarlo, perché sappiamo che il rapporto Kant e la psicologia non era proprio idilliaco, però ha dettato alcuni spunti di riflessione che hanno evidentemente influenzato la medicina esistenziale. Ma c'è un dato comune che unisce l'illuminismo, il diritto moderno, la psicologia esistenziale, che la finalità è la stessa, l'uomo e il suo benessere. E quindi su questa è sicuramente una base comune su cui potremmo lavorare, potremmo collaborare. Ci sono questi spazi che noi intendiamo, stiamo già stressando con il professore Buffardi, ma che potremmo stressare ulteriormente. Per esempio, gli esempi pratici, nei traumi da lutto, casi di morte violenta, risarcimento del danno. In che termini è vissuto la tragedia, la morte di un caro? Ognuno di noi la vive in un modo particolare. Avere degli elementi di conoscenza più approfondita, più precisa, ci permette di fare quel risarcimento personalizzato che la Cassazione prevede. E così abbiamo altri settori, cito solo, per non togliere poi il tempo agli altri, la valutazione della capacità di intendere e di volere, ancora, gli aspetti etici e deontologici. Si sta parlando in questo momento della legge sul fine vita, che mi sembra importante che sia la bioetica, ma anche la psicologia esistenziale possano esprimere qualcosa, e anche la testimonianza alla narrazione, cioè capire in che maniera il vissuto personale possa falsare o possa rappresentare un artefatto per la ricostruzione di un fatto, il racconto di un teste, che può aver visto la stessa cosa da un'angolatura diversa, quindi avere quegli elementi di conoscenza può senz'altro offrire, questo lo può offrire la medicina, la psicologia esistenziale, ma certamente non la clinica o altre. E poi la sofferenza, la vulnerabilità e quant'altro. In conclusione, ci sono degli spazi enormi che per troppo tempo non sono stati, credo in Italia, perché poi all'estero qualcosa la troviamo un pochino, dove c'è una mentalità un po' diversa. Per troppo tempo non sono stati esplorati. Con il Ministero, che sicuramente ci fornirà degli strumenti per poter proseguire su questa strada, e con il professore Buffardi, PSAF è completamente a disposizione per fare tutto quel. Saluto anche Amida, che è una colonna portante e dei rapporti PSAF, professore Buffardi, ma anche poi dell'attività propria di PSAF. Grazie ancora dell'invito e buon lavoro e buon proseguo dei lavori. Grazie.
E certo, vi dovete presentare.
Sentite?
Sono impresentato.
Sentite? Funziona? Sì. A me il compito grato e ingrato di presentare Gianfranco Buffardi, che voi però già conoscete. Un applauso forse lo merita, certamente, anzi certamente lo merita.
Ma sì.
Tutti...
Chiedo scusa ai tecnici, mi attivate il. Ok, perfetto, grazie.
Un attimo,
Sì, sì.
ti devo presentare, poche parole. Lo conoscete già, Gianfranco da tanti anni, tanti, dal 1982 e poi più specificamente e formalmente dal 1988, è stato per l'Italia, insieme a un gruppo di persone, colui che ha permesso alla psicoterapia e alla antropologia ad orientamento esistenziale, dicevo, in Italia di progressivamente essere conosciuta, di essere valutata in un ambito, quello della psicoterapia, dell'antropologia clinica, che al tempo, nella seconda metà del Novecento, erano tenute in secondo piano rispetto ad altre prospettive antropologiche, psicologiche, psicoterapiche. Prevalevano altre tendenze, come è normale che possa avvenire, e potremmo dire che la psicoterapia ad orientamento esistenziale era quasi praticamente misconosciuta. Qui vedo L'Engle, che ho conosciuto nel 1985 insieme a Frankl a Montecatini. Le uniche, tendenze esistenziali che cominciavano ad essere conosciute erano quelle della logoterapia e analisi esistenziale di Viktor Emil Frankl. Ma dicevo, a partire dal gruppo di Padova, poi a proseguire con l'ISUE, con l'Istituto di Scienze Umane Esistenziali, di cui Gianfranco è il presidente, con un gruppo di ricerca, la psicoterapia ad orientamento esistenziale, con la connessa visione antropologica. Finalmente, da alcuni anni in Italia è conosciuta, mi pare di poter dire apprezzata, valutata per quello che, secondo me, merita di essere, specialmente per quello che riguarda una visione che permette di coniugare la psicoterapia, l'antropologia clinica con le scienze progressive, d'avanguardia, a vario livello, sia mediche, sia psicologiche, sia neurologiche, sia della neurofenomenologia e via dicendo. E non ultimo, il mio apprezzamento, questo carissimo amico, è il fatto che ha speso e spende la sua vita per questo tipo di prospettiva e scopo, in maniera, secondo me, encomiabile. Lui è psichiatra, lui è laureato in filosofia, lui è laureato in psicologia, lui ha un dottorato in bioetica, quindi è una persona di spessore culturale, ma è una persona che dedica la propria vita attiva, giorno per giorno, a qualcosa che per me, direbbe Frankl, è uno scopo fondamentale, per cui la sua vita, dalla mia prospettiva, ha veramente senso. Non voglio dire altro perché mi commuoverei, perché la nostra amicizia, insieme a quella di Fernando Boscaino, veramente e la sento profonda, e gli lascio naturalmente la parola.
Non è facile a questo punto parlare. Tra l'altro devo parlare in inglese, quindi è ancora più complicato. Per fortuna che leggendo forse me la cavo meglio. Ok. I talk in English. Cicero wrote, Literarum studia adolescentia malunt, senectutem oblectant, secundas res ornant, in adversis rebus solacum prebent. This is Latin. The cultural studies nourish youth, brings joy in old age, enriches our future lives, and offers comfort in times of difficulty. So let us rejoice. I am rejoicing, and I believe that some of you who, like me, unfortunately, are no longer so young, are rejoicing too. As many of you will be aware, the purpose of this conference, organized by the Scuola di Psicoterapia Esistenziale dell'Istituto di Scienze Umane ed Esistenziali, together with the Federation for Existential Therapy in Europe, is to stimulate a renewed discussion on the training paths of young professionals and the need for psychotherapists to keep up to date. Reflecting on the theme of our meeting, I identified a few issues, among many, that I believe should be addressed in our discussion. Now I propose them to you in no particular order, a kind of brainstorming. Are 4 suggestions. The first, in the global landscape of psychotherapies, cognitive behavioral therapy, CBT, dominate in terms of popularity. Their history tells us how the need arose to combine cognitive work with the early behavioral techniques. For this reason, the word cognitive is already part of their name. As a result, many clients and even many experts, unfortunately, are led to believe that only psychotherapists following this approach deal with the cognitive sphere. But is that really the case? On the contrary, I believe that very few psychotherapies are truly non-cognitive, and existential psychotherapy certainly is not among them. The second, the basis of our psychological approach is that branch of philosophy known as defined as existential. That is the radical thought that through anthropophenomenological reflection arrives at the philosophy of existence. But does this philosophy truly align with the current pragmatics of existential therapy in the world? I don't know if you, but I have noticed many overflows or slipages from this ideal foundation. Why? The third, our model, as we know, doesn't pursue deterministic psychologies. However, it cannot ignore the evolutionary neurosciences, whose theories sometimes seem to me more enchanted by fantasy than committed to scientific rigor. Neuroscience, be able to emergence of noesis in human animals, will it help us understand the appearance of the capacities of meta-consciousness and the capacity for creative sublimation? The fourth. In light of the many questions and the reflection on our therapeutic approach, as outlined in the collective work, the work many of us contributed to a decade ago under the guidance of Stephen Diamond, would it not be more appropriate to define our therapy as existential rather than existential? In this case, Italian terms help us better emphasize the difference between the two adjectives. The existential dichotomy from Heidegger sounds like this in Italian: esistenziale, esistentivo. Some weeks ago, I found in some files in web also the English adjective existentive. In these files was explained that this term was a translation, was translated by Italian. Maybe that in future this adjective will be used more. I hope. Okay, all these considerations, these suggestions, I leave to the dialogue we will have in the coming days. But in short, I believe that the hallmark of our training, the legacy we pass on to our trains, is our mental attitude, the attitude that enables us, as existential psychotherapists, to stimulate the autonomous self-reconditioning of the client. In Italiano, ricondizionamento autonomo, as Ferdinando Brancaleone suggests. But is not a paradox to stimulate another's autonomy? Is this not a kind of oxymoron? Not for our approach. The one who stimulates is not the therapist, counselors, educator, and so on. And the self-reconditioning does not belong to the client, patient, consultant, etc. Rather, both the stimulus and the autonomous self-reconditioning live within and belong to the dialogue itself. That is the true phenomenological existential actor that breathing together, as described by Ernesto Spinelli. Because of this peculiarity, because of the mental attitude that characterizes our training, I feel justified in considering existential, or rather existential, or better, existentive therapy, not just as one form of psychotherapy among many, but as a true metapsychotherapy. Precisely because of its formative role, it appears necessary for all those who encounter others at critical moments in their existence and strive through dialogue to help them. I believe that the mission of this conference is also to validate this formative role of existential therapy, a meta-psychotherapy freely open to all, psychiatrists, psychologists, psychotherapists, counselors, educators, nurses, social workers, coaches. Sorry for apologize to those I have not mentioned, but many professionals could benefit from this training. Don't worry, I am about to conclude. 32 years ago, exactly 32 years ago, James Silman and Michael Ventura published a book entitled "We Have Had 100 Years of Psychotherapy and the World's Getting Worse." As we approach 150 years of psychotherapy, it doesn't seem to me that the world is getting much better. And I don't believe that any psychotherapy, including the one we are discussing here, can stem the negative liquidity in our world. I can only hope that existential therapy, and thus existential therapists, will help each and every person to fall deeply in love with the life. I wish everyone a fruitful and inspiring conference. Grazie a tutti.
Credo che, chiedo scusa, la mia raucedine non accenna a diminuire. Penso che adesso possiamo chiamare i relatori della tavola rotonda che segue, giusto? Quindi ci daranno il cambio Gideon Menda e Gianfranco Buffardi come chair della sessione, nella quale sessione sentiremo il parere di Ernesto Spinelli, di Eugenia Giorganda, Kirk Snyder, Stephen Diamond, Jason Upton e Yaki Martinez Robles. Quindi possiamo salutare i nostri ospiti.
Salutiamo gli ospiti, ringraziamo ancora l'avvocato Razza e il professore Zinno. Grazie. Ci sentiamo in contatto. Accomodatevi voi, Gideon. The strange is that now I have to expose you Gideon Menda. But Gideon Menda is impossible to expose to you because he's too popular. Okay, I have some little up. Gideon Menda is existential psychotherapy supervisor. He's a founder indeed of the existential psychotherapy and the counseling program at Kibbutzim College in Tel Aviv to 2007 start, okay? A member of the founding group of the Israeli Multidisciplinary Association of Psychotherapy and a member of the founding group of Federation of Existential Therapy in Europe. And in this moment, he is the chair of this federation. And I think that he is a big case promoter and very strong in this moment. Thanks, Gideon. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Gianfranco. And good afternoon, everybody. First, I would like to thank our Italian colleagues for welcoming us here today in Italy. In particular, I would like to thank Gianfranco Buffardi and Fernando Buscaino for all the hard work they have invested to enable us to be here together today to celebrate the beauty of the existential approach. Sono felice di essere qui stasera. Yeah. This is the 6th annual conference of FET, the Federation for Existential Therapy in Europe, and it marks the ongoing growth of existential therapy in Europe and around the globe. This panel will attempt to answer the question, what are the unmet needs of existential therapy? Naturally, as one grows, one may and should start focusing on the next phase one wishes to step into. It is a phase of life that follows the initial survival phase and in which one may focus on the higher and broader possibilities of existence. Using Kierkegaard's concept, what we see today may be considered as the potential transition we are willing to make from the first aesthetic sphere in which people primarily focus on how they can fulfill their own needs for personal pleasure, into the second sphere, the ethical one, in which people consider the presence of others and how their actions affect those around them. It may also be considered as the transition we are willing to make from the second sphere into the third one, the religious one, which Kierkegaard considered the highest form of existence. This third sphere is one in which the belief in a concept which is beyond oneself and others is firm enough to include contradictions and desires. Our ability to raise this topic of this panel indicates that the existential approach to therapy is mature enough to be explored further and to discover the unmet needs of existential therapy. As Martin Buber wisely said, as we live, we grow, and our beliefs change. They must change. So I think we should live with this constant discovery. We should be open to this adventure in heightened awareness of living. We should direct our whole existence on our willingness to explore and experience. How do we do it then? Where will we find the answer to the deep and thought-provoking question, what are the unmet needs of existential therapy? To answer this question, in the spirit of the existential approach, it might be wise to first be reminded of the unmet needs of human beings, and only then examine the unmet needs of existential therapy. Because existential therapy is all about human life and existence. As we know, the existential approach attempts to address the tension between how the world we are thrown into functions and how we wish it would have been. This approach unfolds our individual unmet needs in the context of ontological givens. It does so to help us find, alongside the limitations, the concealed levels of freedom we do have, but often do not see. It looks at the need to ensure our continual existence, a need that is limited by our mortality. It looks at the need for continual belonging and broad acceptance, a need that is limited by our isolation and loneliness. It highlights our need for certainty while exercising our freedom, a need that is limited by living in an unpredictable world. It focuses on our need for continual meaning, a need that is limited by living in a meaningless world. Similarly, when examining the unmet needs of existential therapy, the very same framework applies. Therefore, the following questions arise. How do we ensure the existence and the development of existential therapy in a world that is constantly changing and turning into an AI-driven world? How can we reach broader circles of people while we are living in a materialistic-oriented world? How can we expand empirical research and increase existential education in a world that demands instant solutions? How and what will our generation contribute to the presence to the respected tradition of existential therapy in our world. These questions, along others, form the basis of the topics that our panelists will present this afternoon. The dialogue we are creating will potentially pave the way into the fourth developmental sphere. In conclusion, Jean-Paul Sartre had already said before us that existence precedes essence. The existential approach to therapy firmly exists. It needs us to keep on creating its essence. It needs us to take another leap of faith and lead the way to the hearts and souls of humans. With the help of leading figures in the field of existential therapy, this panel, facilitated by Gianfranco and me, will discuss the unmet needs of existential therapy. Now, before
Gideon, one moment. It's possible. I think that I ask that join us the speakers.
Yeah, just a second.
Yes.
Before you do that, I would like to introduce you, Gianfranco. Oh, yeah. So Gianfranco Buffardi is a psychiatrist practicing, it's you, practicing existential therapist and professor of psychotherapy. He holds degrees in medicine, psychology, philosophy, and doctorates in bioethics. He is the former director of a mental health unit in Caserta, Italy, where he was engaged many times in national and international research programs. Gianfranco is professor of psychiatry and mental health at Giustino Fortunato, is that how you say? Yeah. Telematic University, former invited professor at UER Rome, and temporary professor in psychiatric, psychological, and philosophical disciplines at other Italian universities. Gianfranco is also a member of the board of trustees of the Federation for Existential Therapy in Europe. He is the author of several books of psychotherapy, and his papers have been published in several national and international professional journals. Now, you may...
You forget something. You forget something.
Tell me?
That my English is horrible.
Oh, it's not that bad.
I ask to Eugenia, Ernesto, Kirk, Stephen, okay, Eugenia, Gheorghanda, Ernesto Spinelli, are all friends. It's, for me, no, it's important, the surname, it's important the name. Stephen Diamond, Jason Upton, and Jackie Martinez Robles. Okay, thanks. Okay. Yeah. One, three, six. Okay. Kirk. Well. Prendiamo una sedia per Gideon. Una sedia. One more Gideon. Stand up, Gideon.
All right.
You are too big.
I'm happy to invite our first speaker, Professor Ernesto Spinelli. I assume we all know Ernesto, but shortly, Professor Ernesto Spinelli is a fellow of the British Psychological Society. In the year 2000, he received the BPS Division of Counseling Psychology Award for outstanding contribution to the profession. In 2019, Ernesto was given the BPS Award for distinguished contribution to practice. His textbook, Practicing Existential Therapy, The Relational World, has been widely praised as a major contribution to the advancement of existential theory and practice. In his old age, these are Ernesto's words, Ernesto has taken to writing novels, including an ongoing private eye series. Ernesto.
Buonasera. So in one of his very last interviews, Jean-Paul Sartre was asked, how is it that you keep reading so many detective novels? And Sartre answered, I read them because I enjoy them, but just as importantly, I read them because the detective is someone who is always on the periphery of the world. The detective is neither in the world nor out of the world, but keeps moving between them, not belonging to either, not excluding himself or herself from either. And in the same way, Sartre pointed out, so too is existentialism. We have to look at existentialism as a movement, an approach, a philosophy that is neither in nor out of the world, that keeps moving more to the inside and then more to the outside. Now, I say this because as existential therapists, we too are caught in the same peripheral movement, moving closer towards the world of psychotherapy as it is in its wider sense, and moving outside of it, distancing ourselves from it. In response to the general views, ideas that this panel is meant to be talking about, I would like to suggest that in recent years, as I see it, existential therapy has moved a little too far into the world of psychotherapy, such that the way it presents itself, how we are seen by other models and approaches of psychotherapy, is one that is too similar, too much like every other approach to psychotherapy. And in doing so, we have lost our radical edge. We have moved not enough to the outer fringes of the peripheral space where we find ourselves. We've lost, to a very large extent, our radical voice. And to my mind, this is sad, but also extremely dangerous. It is dangerous, as I see it, because psychotherapy, in its dominant form, is undergoing a radical, if unwanted, shift. And that shift is through the arising and development of AI. In the United Kingdom at the moment, AI experts are focusing first and foremost upon the development of AI psychotherapy. It is the primary area of interest. And in doing so, AI will overwhelm therapeutic practice in its most general sense within a relatively brief period of time. At the moment, people who are already experiencing AI therapy are expressing to their delight how empathetic they feel and experience the process is. What they are not getting yet, and what AI experts are working on, is the challenging aspects of therapy. But that will come. And what will also come will be all those elements of therapy that are manualizable, repeatable, instructive, and so forth. Now, this is not meant to depress you. It's meant to challenge us. We have a great opportunity here. We have the opportunity of allowing existential therapy to once again move to that edge of periphery that expresses a form, an understanding, an awareness of therapy that is not so clearly aligned to the dominant approaches to psychotherapy. It is a view of psychotherapy that is not primarily concerned with curing, with educating, with helping, but rather is that attempt to stand beside the other, to engage with the person who is there, not the person who would like to be there or should be there, or once used to be there, or might in the future be there, but who is here at this point in time, and how they are experiencing that way of being. This, in many ways, is the most radical challenge that existential therapy can make. To attempt to embrace the other who is present. Think for yourselves. How often are you allowed, and do you allow yourself to be who you are being without an immediate sense of judgment, of criticism, of a desire to be different, to be other than as you are being? And how is it to be met by another who tries and fails, but tries to meet you as you are? This is outside the arena of insurance companies, of government agencies, of medical services. This is an engagement. This is a form of communicating, of being with and being for the other through your way of being. Now, the big challenge which you have is, if you accept this view, this idea, how is a training program possible that is less concerned with the manualization of existential therapy and is much more concerned with the expression, with the breathing of existential thought and existential practice? Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Ernesto. You were talking about the AI, and that reminded me that one of my clients recently came to therapy, and he said that he named his chat GPT by the name David. And he started telling me that he was speaking to David. And he told David, David, look, you know me for so long, you know so much about me. Do you think I should change my work or not? And then he started a long monologue telling me about his relationship with that David, which is actually a bot or something like that. So you are taking us to think about an interesting issue that relates to a changing world, and how can we continue being existential therapists who focus also on relationship in a changing world. Yeah. Will any of the panelists would like to comment or say anything? Yeah.
Well, I think that was a great setting of the table for this discussion, because so much of what is happening in conventional psychiatry and psychology seems to be moving from an increasing enchantment with the machine world toward actually wanting us, at some level, to become machines for reasons of efficiency, speed, instant results, and a sort of path of least resistance for the culture. And it's very tied up with our socioeconomic system, and that's part of the challenge as well.
Thank you very much. Anyone else? Yeah.
Thank you, Ernesto. Yeah, one of the things that I notice, and I think a lot of people probably notice in our practices, is the effect of social media upon our clients. It has an enormous effect. It creates various forms of addictions and has a huge impact upon relatedness. So with this as a starting point, I know there's a fear that is going to take our jobs. And I can see the NHS in the UK completely jumping on it to be able to deliver manualized therapy. But one of the other things that goes through my mind will be the clients who come in the door, and the clients who will be having relationships with AI, which they are already having. I've listened to some very disturbed podcasts, I'm sure lots of people have, about boyfriends and girlfriends and so forth. And what it's going to mean for us in terms of the relating that we have with our clients, and how profoundly important it's going to be that existential therapy is grounded in intersubjectivity. Yeah? That there is two subjects who are meeting each other. So I think regardless of, it's going to happen, but my mind goes to the ways in which we might see it present with the clients who will be coming in the rooms.
Thank you. I'm delighted to invite our second speaker, Dr. Evgenia Georganda. Evgenia is co-founder of the Hellenic Association for Existential Therapy, Gigneste, where she is trainer and supervisor. She is the author of 4 books and numerous articles for journals and collective publications for both in Greece and abroad. She has served for several years as secretary in the board of directors of the National Organization of Psychotherapists of Greece, and as membership secretary and member of the board of trustees of the Federation for Existential Therapy in Europe. In 2023, she received the Charlotte and Carl Buhler Award from Division 32 of the American Psychological Association for her and her association's outstanding and lasting contribution to humanistic psychology. Evgenia.
Well, thank you, Gideon, and thank you, Gianfranco, for the invitation. To be honest, when I received the invitation from Gianfranco with the title about the unmet needs, I was a little puzzled and didn't really know what it was all about and about whose unmet needs we were actually talking about. And then when I received the further instructions from Gideon that we each had 8 minutes to present, I started getting more worried about what I was going to say. I lost 1 minute already, yes. So I talked with a lot of my colleagues at Jigneste, and as you all know, or maybe you don't know, Jigneste is the Greek word for becoming. So our association is called Becoming because, as Ernesto pointed out, we are constantly becoming. We are constantly in flux and we are constantly changing. And this is also a topic that has been very important for me in my life. So I want to take this opportunity and thank everybody for being here and be very grateful for all of us and myself being alive and being here right now. The world is in a very difficult point in time. So this was my first thought, actually, in my mind of how could existential therapy really reach to a wider audience. And of course, I guess Emmy is going to say a lot more about that with the existential movement and all of the effort for a greater outreach to reach more people. Because as Sartre used to say, you know, without action, knowledge is not really so important. On the other hand, I really do want to stress more mundane things like the need for more research so that we will have a more evidence-based approach so that it can be included in more mainstream. All of the NHS and all of the healthcare systems all over the world are really falling apart. Still, I think the people who are in great need of therapy are not only the well-off, they're the poor people that are really suffering. And the question is, how can we provide for them in some ways? So it was also mentioned the need for training. We need to ensure that the training programs are really of high quality and including more, I think, somatic work. One of the things I'm experiencing, at least, is that more and more people are having serious traumas. And as we know, trauma and trauma work also needs to focus more on the embodied aspects of our being. So I was wondering whether existential therapy can really be enriched by more somatic therapies and, of course, more about creative approaches. We also have more what Alexis Harisiadis, who unfortunately couldn't be here, is talking about is the poetic existential approach to include more all forms of art in our approach. And the third point that I would like to make is how existential therapy needs to really, as I said, reach out to a greater public. And you already talked about AI and how this is going to infiltrate. So we really need to be more able to be more in tune with what is happening in modernization of the world. But I will agree with Ernesto that what we as existential therapists have to offer is this kind of presence where we are engaged with the other in a very caring and loving way, which is what I think is missing most in our world today. And we need to be able to preserve it and not get lost into all of the animosity that is present at this point in time in our world. We see more and more wars and conflicts and people turning more towards extreme movements. So we all need to be able to hold on to the values of being more kind to one another. So all of these, well, we could say unmet needs, I don't see them really as flaws, but I see them as the growing edges where existential therapy needs to really focus more and try to meet the times that we are now facing. So thank you, and I look forward to our dialogue.
Well, thank you, Evgenia. It is always a pleasure to listen to you. And I think one of the things that you are telling us is the need to make sure that the world will keep on having people who are caring and loving. And in terms of expanding the circle of peoples we are being involved with, I think one of the aims for us as therapists is to have more school counselors who practice existential therapy. Would anyone like to comment or say anything? Panelists? So we'll do it later. Yeah? Yeah.
I agree 100%, but this is exactly why probably we need to be more evidence-based so that we can be more convincing about our approach so that it can become more mainstream.
Yeah.
Although it has its other side as well, with, being mainstream and also you also miss out on something. But being into schools, I think, is very important because what I see in Greece, at least, is that younger individuals are becoming all the more aggressive and all the more bitter and feisty, and there is a lot of bullying in schools and so on. So the violence that they experience in the world, I think, is really affecting them. So I don't know how we can counterbalance that. But it would be nice if there were more existential therapists in schools.
Yeah, I'd like to add to that. I started working in schools in the 90s in the UK, in which there wasn't a lot of counsellors present. And I think over the past 20 or so years, the increasing awareness of mental health and counsellors in school has really, really grown and really developed. So the idea of therapy for young people now is not necessarily the same type of stigma as it had before. So I think there's a really wonderful opportunity to be able to do that. But what I'd also add is, I would add not just counselling. I would say discussion groups, forums. There was an initiative in Australia once to take philosophy into schools, but not to teach it just conceptually, to make it applicable and relevant for the young people in their lives. And I heard the interviews with the young people, And they said, I can think for the first time about the issues that matter to me. This has changed my life. Now, I think existential philosophy can offer this. But we need to, excuse me, we need to create those spaces. We need to go to where the young people are. They are in schools, you know, and we need to access all young people. And I think so much benefit would come from it. So I'm really, really supportive of that.
So actually, existentialism is a way of living. Yeah. Yeah. All right. So I'm very happy to introduce our third speaker, Dr. Kirk Schneider. Kirk is a leading spokesperson for existential humanistic and existential integrative therapy. He is current president and co-founder of the Existential Humanistic Institute and the adjunct faculty at Saybrook University and formerly at Teachers College, Columbia University. His latest book is Life Enhancing Anxiety, Key to a Sane World.
Thank you, Gideon, and thank you, Gianfranco, and all for being here. So I'd like to address two issues here. The first is the need, the unmet need for good existential depth clinical training. This is a major problem, certainly in the US, where more and more of the training is converging around what you might call the efficiency model for living, the machine model for living, machine-mediated model, this path of least resistance I was talking about before that's so appealing to people and to management companies of therapy who make a profit on turning over clientele as quickly as possible and basically giving people the illusion anyway that they're cured or helped with a rather mechanistic protocol in therapy. I think the biggest issue, and both our speakers have alluded to this, is the problem of the lack of cultivation of presence. I would define presence as the holding and illuminating of that which is palpably significant within the client and between client and therapist. And it's a critical medium by which we can meet people at their deepest levels of struggle, it seems to me. This is one of the big problems, is that most of the conventional therapies converge on our relationship to our biology, our relationship to our cognition, our relationship to behavior, and our relationship to the parental matrix or the cultural matrix we come into, emerge from, but not our relationship to existence, our relationship to what some of us are calling the existential unconscious, the further reaches of consciousness that extend to the indefinite origins of our existence, of the cosmos. Now, I think mechanistic approaches will have a very difficult time meeting people in that very primal place of our sense of smallness before the vastness of creation. And this is what we come into at birth as well. And if we're not meeting people there, then I fear that we're not getting to the deeper fears and not providing people with the skills to work with their primal anxieties in such a way where they can then begin to experience their lives more on the edge of wonder and discovery rather than terror and overwhelm. That's my thesis with life-enhancing anxiety. We need to bring anxiety back in the picture. That's a part of who we are when we grow and when we live more fully. So I know I've got to move on to the next topic of how important it is for existential therapy and therapists, all of us, to step out of our cubicles with our individual patients, not completely leave them, but to step out and bring the riches of our perspective to our society, to our broken world. This is something that I've been working on for quite a long time in terms of promoting bridge-building dialogues between people who are very divided politically, culturally. And just one concrete example of this work, I've recently started a certificate program, but more broadly a movement we call the Corps of Depth Healers, like the Peace Corps, the Corps of Depth Healers, which is an attempt to rally people in the helping professions who are interested in the deeper kinds of relationships with people, what we call emotionally restorative relationships, where people feel heard and seen and gets at the roots of their problem. And so I and a wonderful graduate student, Tyler Gamlin, have started this certificate program where we expose folks who are in the helping professions to some of the theories, some of the great wisdom that has been brought to bear on applying depth principles of practice to social crises and social issues. And then in the second half of the curriculum, they have a chance to home in on a particular area that they want to bring these skills, these abilities to meet people at the deeper levels too. And these include bridge-building dialogues, as I was mentioning before, depth-oriented social work, depth-oriented spiritual care, depth-oriented psychotherapy for underserved communities, critical to make that more affordable and accessible to people who really need emotionally restorative relationship. Awe-based environmental psychology, relational approaches to social justice, life coaching and mentoring, humanistic and awe-based education, humanistic approaches to management and diplomacy, and depth-oriented school counseling. It's a lot of areas there. But the point being, we need it in a lot of places. And we'll be reshuffling deck chairs on the Titanic if we don't develop the equivalent, I think, of the military army in addressing these needs. And you and we are the people, or are certainly a segment of the people who can do this, who have some of these skills of being able to meet people at their deepest levels of struggle, which can then turn around to a much greater inner freedom and capacity to experience the awe of life. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much. Any thoughts at this point from our panelists? Our next speaker is Dr. Stephen Diamond. Stephen Diamond is a clinical and forensic psychologist practicing in Los Angeles, California. He is the author of Anger, Madness, and Daimonic, The Psychological Genesis of Violence, Evil, and Creativity, with a foreword by his former mentor, Rollo May, and a chapter titled The Psychology and Psychotherapy of Evil, Encountering the Daimonic, in the forthcoming APA Handbook of Humanistic and Existential Psychology. Currently, in addition to his private psychotherapy practice, Dr. Diamond provides clinical supervision to graduate students from the Chicago School of Professional Psychology and is the counseling psychologist for a subacute residential psychiatric treatment facility.
Thank you, Dr. Menda, very much. And thank you, Gianfranco Buffardi, Dr. Buffardi, for organizing, congratulations for organizing this meeting. It's very exciting for me to be here. I'm seeing people who I have not seen for a decade. The last time I saw them was at the first Congress of Existential Psychotherapy held in London, organized by Emmy Van Derzen. And it's also a thrill to see all of these new faces and a lot of young people interested in existential psychotherapy. So I'm very, very happy to be here. And despite the fact that I only have 6 minutes or so left to speak with you about two subjects that I'm very concerned with, I'm going to try my best just to set the stage for some later and further discussion as we go on over the next couple of days. All right, so just maybe plant some seeds, some thoughts. Now, this panel is about the unmet needs of existential psychotherapy. I'm sure there's more than the ones I'm going to mention, but the two concerns that I have mainly, one of them has to do with the importance of existential therapists being able to address the phenomenon of unconsciousness. We tend, existential therapy tends to think of the unconscious as something from Freud, from Jung, but the unconscious is a real phenomenon. Unconsciousness is a real phenomenon. It's an existential fact of life. Unconsciousness in the sense of what we don't know about ourselves and what we won't allow ourselves to know about ourselves. So this is part of the human condition, and I think it's very important for existential psychotherapists to acknowledge that and to learn to work with what I call the phenomenon of unconsciousness. If you're not comfortable with the unconscious, the phenomenon of unconsciousness. Now, the second concern that I want to bring up is the need for existential therapy, especially for existential therapy, because existential therapy prides itself in a way on being philosophically informed and grounded. And so I think that it's terribly important for existential therapists to be able to acknowledge and address in therapy the reality of evil. Now, this has been alluded to by some other speakers already today, the state of the world, the problems, the violence, the trauma. Evil is an existential reality, a fact of life. And we deny it or dismiss it at our own peril. So I'll speak about that just for about 2 more minutes, I guess. I have a PowerPoint prepared, but I didn't give it to the folks in the back. I didn't know I needed to do that. So I'm going to just quickly read the first page of that PowerPoint for you, if you don't mind, if you'll allow me. And here's what it says. In his now classic text, Existential Psychotherapy, in 1980, Irvin Yalom, whom I'm sure you're all familiar with, identifies 4 givens of existence. What he, invoking the theological language of Paul Tillich, calls ultimate concerns. And those are death, freedom, isolation, and meaninglessness. So for Yalom, these are the fundamental existential givens of life, with which we all are confronted and which we all must contend. And Yalom defines them as, quote, certain intrinsic properties that are part and an inescapable part of the human being's existence in the world, unquote. However, it is my contention that Dr. Yalom omits mention of what I consider to be an at least equally elemental 5th ultimate concern, and that would be the aforementioned existential given, fact, phenomenon, experience, or reality of evil. So, you know, much of what psychotherapists deal with, as I see it, is the consequence of individuals, of people, having been exposed to evil of some sort. Now, that evil can be individual, it can be human evil, it can be some sort of evil that's been perpetrated against the person, physical abuse, sexual abuse, all sorts of things like that. Abandonment, but also by what I call natural evil. And this would be things like disasters, hurricanes, tornadoes, earthquakes. These are devastating experiences for human beings. And you know, the reactions that we have are very profound, and they can be very long-lasting. And what people need, what our patients need, our clients, if you prefer, what we need, is some way to make sense of these experiences, some way to think about them. And I find the concept of evil to be helpful in this regard, that what we're seeing is what in the patients that come to us is what I call the trauma of evil. So I think I'll leave it at that for now. I've got a lot more to say about this, but we'll be doing a little mini roundtable, I think, perhaps tomorrow on this topic. So I hope to see you there. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. All right. Our next speaker is Dr. Jason Apton. Jason is an existential therapist and dance movement psychotherapist. He is an assistant professor at Regent's University, London, where he co-leads the MA Year 3 Existential Pathway and the postgraduate certificate in existential psychotherapy. With over 25 years of experience across private practice, education, and the voluntary sector, his clinical work has included trauma, sexual abuse, and forensic services. His academic and therapeutic work is grounded in existential phenomenological philosophy and an embodied approach to psychotherapy. Please.
Thank you, Gideon. Okay, so I want to speak about the ethics of access. So I want to pose the question, and I need to say I'm speaking from a UK context. That's my experience, that's where my work has been. So that's the context in which I'm speaking. But I want to pose the question, is there a structural inequality in existential therapy in the UK? And it's a question that's been around for me for quite some time. As Gideon acknowledged, a lot of my work has been in the voluntary sector. And one of the things that I have really valued about the voluntary sector is a commitment to access, overcoming barriers to access, and reaching communities. We used to say that there are hard to reach communities because people don't necessarily engage, don't know how to engage with services. So working very hard to overcome that is an important part of the work that I used to do. So I was delighted when I saw the launch of the existential movement that has embraced many of these into their objectives. So really what I want to do is just lend my voice to this, because for me it's a really important dialogue. So one of the issues is money. Yeah. Training as existential therapy is expensive. Yeah. This can create a pressure to earn. Pressure to earn can create private practice and higher fees. Higher fees can lead to inaccessibility. Inaccessibility can lead to privilege, and privilege can lead to underrepresentation. There you have a structural cycle. Yeah? So looking into this a little bit more. In the UK, the average cost to train as a UKCP therapist is around £30,000 to £40,000. Yeah, together with therapy and add-ons. Yeah. To train as a BACP counsellor, it's £12,000 to £15,000. Now, there are two main existential trainings in the UK. They are in the region of £55,000 to £60,000. Yeah, that's a very, very big difference. So, one then has to ask, who's training as an existential therapist? Yeah? It's probably people from privileged backgrounds. Yeah? Those who are retraining after having had a first career. We get a lot of that at Regents. Or those willing to go into significant amounts of debt in order to be able to do so. But that creates a problem. Several years ago, the BACP did some research. And what they found was 80% of therapists in the UK earn less than £30,000. That's not a very good return on your investment if you've spent £60,000 to train. Yeah? So it's no wonder that there might be a pressure to earn. It's natural. There's a driver to it. At Regents, trainees start seeing clients privately if they want to, in the third year and into the fourth year. And what I hear more and more trainees say, we need to do this to pay for the fees. Yeah? So already before graduating, there is this economic push into private practice and into the world of higher fees. So I was really curious, how much does it cost to see an existential therapist in the UK? So I turned to AI and their deep research function. Now, this is not definitive, it's not gold standard research, but it looked at dozens and dozens and dozens of websites, and this is what it came back with. The range was between £50 to £200, and the average was 80. Yeah. So who is attending therapy? It is middle to high income earners. Yeah? It might be those who have already internalized the cultural value of therapy and are willing to make financial sacrifices. Yeah? But if you've internalized that, you've already come from a certain type of background already. Yeah? Then we need to consider who is excluded. Well, the picture that's being painted is working class, low-income earners, pensioners, students, single parents, carers, those on disabilities, universal credits, and those from excluded and marginalized communities. Of course, there are outliers. I know there are some existential therapists. I know one existential therapist who literally charges, pay what you can afford. There are outliers to this. But I'm trying to think about the big picture. So what happens for those from these community groups is that by and large, they're not in the therapy room. They're not in the training room. And it means they are not shaping the future discourse of existential therapy. For me, that's really important. Their voices need to be here in order to shape the future direction of existential therapy. Existential therapy is lived within limits. We understand that. Yet, do we need to consider that the facticity of structural inequality may well be denying many the socio-economic freedom to access and participate in existential therapy itself? So getting ready for this talk, I asked lots of people, what do you think an unmet need is? What do you think an unmet need is? Such a big question. One of my supervisees said, Jason, existential therapy needs to stop waiting for people to come to it. It needs to start going to where people are. And I went, yes, because it completely matched my experience, and it really matched my experience of working in the voluntary sector. As Gideon said, I worked in the fields of trauma, sexual abuse, sexual offending, and domestic violence. Most of our clients were from excluded or marginalized communities. Most of our services were free, and they were all delivered by qualified therapists, not trainees on placement. But this required a commitment to overcoming barriers to access. Everything from finances, stigma, accessible language, awareness and visibility, cultural attitudes, appreciating cultural differences, and so forth. It's massive. It requires a lot of effort. And we did this through funding, strategic partnerships, embedding therapy in community centers. We talked about schools earlier. For me, that's one perfect example, but there's many others. Outreach programs, flexible service models, and a willingness to meet people where they are. So my reason for saying all this is one of the many things I think I benefited from working in the voluntary sector is a particular style of thinking. It's very practical, it's very responsive, and it has this commitment to overcoming barriers. So it all points to, for me, a really important question. Who is not here? Who is not here? And what do we need to do to create or change in order to make their presence possible? I don't have all the answers. I think we need dialogue, and I think we need discussion, But I just want to end on Levinas, because I find Levinas so profoundly inspiring. Levinas would encourage us that we have an ethical commitment to respond to the vulnerable face of the other. But for me, that is not just the vulnerable face of those who are present. It is also the vulnerable faces of those who are not present. And I suggest that it is worth thinking about whether or not we need to address such, and there's others, structural inequalities in order to make access more widely possible.
Yes, please. Please do.
Voglio ringraziare Jason per le tematiche che ci ha offerto.
Would you like me to translate?
Yes, of course. No. Intanto per quanto riguarda la mia raucedine non passa, scusatemi. Dicevo, intanto per quanto riguarda i costi della formazione di un psicoterapeuta, Jason, in Italia saremmo lietissimi di accogliervi tutti a braccia aperte a costi molto inferiori a quelli che ci hai raccontato. L'altra, scherzi a parte, Jason ha posto di fronte questa platea di curatori, curanderi, psicologi, psicoterapeuti, psichiatri, vi ha posto di fronte a degli aspetti socio-economico che probabilmente non abbiamo mai considerato. E Jason ci ricorda che nessuna scienza o nessuna cultura o nessuna metodica può essere autoreferenziale, che non basta essere degli ottimi psicoterapeuti se non ti ricordi che nella società vi sono persone che, pur avendone bisogno, non riescono ad accedere. Allora ben venga il suo invito, ognuno di noi, ognuno di voi, che ha diritto peraltro a un rientro dell'investimento economico anche gravoso, che è stato necessario per conseguire la qualifica di psicoterapeuta, a un ritorno di questo investimento. Potrebbe dedicare 8 ore alla settimana all'associazione di volontariato, o alla parrocchia o alla cooperativa, mettere a disposizione il suo sapere, il suo saper fare, il suo saper essere e aggiungo il suo saper divenire a favore di chi non può permettersi certe cose. Volevo solo riprendere le considerazioni che ci ha offerto Jason, sottolinearle e augurarmi che possano essere queste considerazioni argomento di futuro confronto. Di nuovo grazie Jason.
Well, thank you, Fernando. Our next speaker is Dr. Yaki Martinez-Robles. Yaki is a psychologist with a master and PhD in psychotherapy. He is founder and director of the Circle of Studies in Existential Therapy, Mexico, with over 22 years of experience in training existential therapists. He is certified in psychedelic-assisted psychotherapy by the Integrative Psychiatry Institute, where he currently is serving as a faculty member in that international certification. He is a relational, gestalt, and existential phenomenological therapist, working both one-on-one and with groups. Yaki is the author of several books on the existential approach, speaker and teacher at national and international levels. Yaki will speak in Spanish. English? English, fantastic.
Hi, everyone. Jason mentioned context, so let me say something about context. I'm coming from Mexico, so my context is Mexico and Latin America. So I originally prepared my presentation in Spanish, but I'll be sharing it in English. So to help me stay within the time we each have, I'll be using my notes as a guide. One unmet need for existential therapy is fun. Over lunch, Alison, Adam, and I were joking about how maybe one of the big unmet needs in existential therapy is fun. And it's half joking and half seriously, because sometimes we take ourselves a little bit too seriously. But okay, let's do it a little bit more seriously now. Okay, perhaps the most urgent unmet need is how to reach marginalized communities and societies. If we understand that sign as always situated, then we must also take seriously the economic, social, and geographical conditions that shapes that situation. The truth is that existential therapy often becomes more accessible for those who live under conditions of privilege, as we mentioned before. And at the same time, it tends to theorize from within those same conditions. This is why I want to bring in the voices of people I've learned from and people who try to cover this need, like Emilio Romero, Miguel Jarquín, Paulo Freire, Franz Fanon, Louis Gordon, Ignacio Martín Baró, Todd Dubose, Pablo Rispo, and others. All of them point out this very important need. So this is the first one. The second one that we need to become is that we need to become more aware of sociocultural differences. For instance, the existential perspective still carries a strong Eurocentric emphasis, as has been pointed out by thinkers by Enrique Dussel and more recently Natalie Fraser in the UK. Yet they are powerful existential developments happening outside of Europe and outside the United States. These contributions are often made invisible in subtle ways. For example, existential therapy is often not even imagined as something that truly exists in Latin America. Sometimes in the US or in some countries in Europe, when I say that I am existential therapist, really? In Latin America, in Mexico, existential? It's like they don't believe that they really exist over there. And it also comes as a surprise, when people realize it does. And from a US perspective, and sometimes even within Europe, there is a tendency to reduce the entire region to a single culture, as is all of Latin America were just Mexico. All Latin America is Mexico. And that flattens and erases the rich diversity of Latin American cultures. It will be like saying that all Europeans are German, or all Europeans are French. Of course, that sounds absurd. We all know how different Germans, French, English, and Italian peoples could be. In the same way, Argentinians, Brazilians, Mexicans, Colombians, and others are also profoundly different from one another. Another example. Many of us in Latin America speak the same language, yes, Spanish. But this is because we share a history of colonization. So, when Latin Americans are grouped together, but European countries are treated as distinct and separate, this is a subtle way of continuing colonial patterns. So it says, we have Spanish, French, German, Italy, and Latin America. Come on! We are more than 20 different countries, more than 20 different cultures. So another way, subtle, is when we keep English language as the default for practical reasons. You know, in academic spaces, I'm also grateful that we have English as a common language, of course. It allows us to connect across borders. And that's truly valuable, of course. But at the same time, that very convenience can subtly erase the voices of many thinkers who may not be able or may not choose to express themselves in English. And when that happens, we risk narrowing the conversation without even realizing it. You know, in my country, in Mexico, only those with a certain level of privilege can afford to learn English. And this creates a vicious cycle because English becomes the access point to be heard, but not everyone has that access. And the last one, but I need a little bit of water because I become so passionate about that. Okay, the last one. Despite the fact that existential therapy is rooted in the paradigm of relatedness, and I mean that we are not just woven into relationships, that our very being emerge from relatedness. We don't exist first and then relate. We come into being through relatedness. It is the fabric of connection that the self is formed and revealed, is in the fabric of connection. Well, but anyway, we often fall back into individualistic postures. Something that deeply connects to this need is the importance of focusing more on the possibilities of doing therapeutic work in groups, not just through one-on-one models. We need to work with groups, and not only in group therapy, also with groups in more reflecting way, in a big sizes of groups. You know, in groups, it becomes harder to overlook that we are always in relation, because the group makes that reality visible, immediate, and dynamic. So that's why, for instance, in Mexico and Colombia, in the existential circle, or the Círculo de Estudios en Terapia Existencial in Mexico, we think during the training, we need to spend some time in group therapy. So every student have to spend 1 year at least in group therapy. And we invite the students to become trained in existential group therapy as well, because we need to focus more into groups. This is a way that we can go with more and more people in more easy way. So in this line also, there's people who are working. For instance, Karen Wakefield Dixon, Adam McLean, and of course, Irving Yalom. So we need to speak and to learn and to study more about groups and about group therapy. So, thank you very much.
Thank you, Eki.
Together.
Well, thank you, Yaki. I think what you're telling us is the real mother tongue of all of us is not English and not Spanish and not Italian and not French. It's the language of existentialism. And this we all understand. Please, Gianfranco.
existentialism are very different from French, from Italy, from some other population.
You think so?
Yes, I think that also you know about this. No, some of you may have thought that 8 minutes, yes, were too few for this. But I think that we have had a lot of suggestions, a lot of stimulus, a lot of different stimulus, and I think that this is the mission of this group to improve our capacity of new thinking, of new thoughts, of new stimulus for the future. Now I think that it's better to have a little break for before the important stimulus that we are listening. We are listening to Emmy von Deurzen, and before the ceremony for Federation of European for the existential therapy in Europe. Okay. Now are 5:20 here, okay? 20 minutes? Yeah. Okay? Well, 20 minutes of break. Thanks all.
So we're coming back at 20 past 5?
No. We are
Yeah, we're coming back at 5:25. 5:25,
Okay.
yes.